Back in the 1970s, the global motor industry was a very different animal from what it is today. There were a lot more independent manufacturers. There were a lot more marques within those manufacturers. Things have consolidated hugely, and this was predicted back in the 1980s, to the point that really there's no more than 8 or 10 major manufacturers these days that control the whole shooting match. That is until the Chinese came along, but that's a story for another time. Ford Motor Company in particular is one that springs to mind. Ford of Europe was largely independent of Ford of America, although Ford of America signed off on all of its products. But it had different design teams. And Bob Lutz, who's a Swiss American, who was in charge of Ford of Europe back in the early 80s, was ultimately responsible for the Ford Scorpio behind me, or the Mark III Ford Granada, as Brits would know it. This was one of his failed projects, the US version known as Mercury. There's a video coming out on that in the not too distant future as well. The Ford Escort, I think, was one car in particular that really highlighted the issues between Ford of America and Ford of Europe, certainly in terms of customer tastes and what designers thought they were being expected of from the public. Being expected of? Anyway, so the Ford Escort, of course, debuted in Europe back in 1967, and in 1974, that first generation car was rehashed into the Mark II. But in 1974, the third generation model got underway, and it was going to be radically different. It was going to move from rear drive to front drive. It was intended to be a hatchback, and it was also going to be a global car. Now, there were two design teams that were set up in order to develop the third generation car. One in Europe that was headed by Uwe Barnson, and one in America that was headed by Gene. His name's going to come up on the screen. Both of these teams were overseen by House Berlick, and House Berlick was overseen by Lee Iacocca, who reported directly to Henry Ford II. These design teams had very different ideas from the get-go as to how the car should look and how the car should perform. The Europeans wanted a very minimalist in terms of styling, small, easy to maneuver, affordable hatchback. The Americans, on the other hand, felt that it should be larger, it should be broader, and it should be sportier. Sperlich could not get these two teams to see eye to eye. And so Henry Ford II fired him. After firing Lee Iacocca, Iacocca went to Chrysler, took some novel designs with him that Henry Ford II wasn't interested in, and House Berlick followed him, and the rest is history. As a result of this, the two styling teams, design teams, really went their own ways. And by the time that the car was pretty much finalized in late 1978, the two cars shared nothing except for a dashboard support brace and an ashtray. They did share a version of the CVH engine, the 1.6, but that didn't last long either. A couple of years ago, I was reading a Haggerty magazine, which featured a rather interesting Ford and Escort collection from 1981 to 1983 that a young guy had been putting together. It also happened to be local to where I live. Even better. So I reached out to Danny Farcas, who is the owner of the cars, and asked him if I could write about them for Classic Retro Modern magazine back in Britain. And he said, come on over. So I did. And it was one of the most enjoyable articles that I've actually written for the magazine. By the way, I no longer contribute on a regular basis to the magazine, but I still keep my oar in with them, and I do produce articles every now and again, and will continue to do so. So bear in mind that even though we're in in early spring now, this was actually shot last summer. I'm Darren, and welcome to Auto Atlantica. I'm here in front of a collection of Ford Escorts, Mark III Ford Escorts as I would know them in the US. These are Mark Is, because that's when this was the first Escort that debuted in the US. And I'm not just with one, I'm with half a dozen here. And there's more back there. Now, some of these run, some of them don't. They are part of a collection of a chap named Danny Farcas. He has this incredible collection. Now, you might be thinking, if you're sitting there in Britain, you might be thinking, what's so special about a Ford Escort collection? People do that. Not here, they don't. Ford Escorts were very much sort of throwaway cars. And what Danny has done is save these. He's bought and traded some, but he's tried to trade up where he can. And he's now got some really amazing examples. Thanks very much, Danny, for having me here. And we've had a lot of fun taking photos this afternoon for Classic Retro Modern. I can't thank Danny enough for his time. So Danny, what got you into Ford Escorts? I knew you used to be into VW Rabbits.
So yeah, we had a couple of the Volkswagen Rabbits, the diesel ones. They were good cars, and I would daily drive them. Got really good fuel mileage. All of mine were diesels. Most of them were Southern vehicles. Basically did the same thing with those. Kind of got out of those. They were just getting too expensive. Parts were not hard to find, but they were a little more on the expensive side. I always remember as a kid, my brother had one of these. And I always remember when he would come visit. That car just always stuck in my memory. Um, I had a diesel one years and years and years ago that I was never able to get running. Had sat for a long time. Engine was seized. Life got in the way. I sold it, and I always had that car, same car in the back of my head, saying I always wanted to get one day that ran, drove, operated. I could drive it. Since then, I've had probably 6, 8, 10 of the diesel ones between sedans, wagons, whatever.
And you had a few GTs as well.
Had a few GTs, had a couple turbo GTs. I had a turbo GT that was all original, 19,000 miles. It was in beautiful shape. Did have some issues with it, but it was just getting a little bit too much for me to do. So I had sold that to a friend of mine and sold a couple other. I had another GT turbo that wasn't original, was pretty modified. Just wasn't my taste. I like more of the original stock appearing cars that really haven't been messed with. And that's when we went and got the Electra. I had been chasing that car for a long time, as we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
So we got rid of those. Ended up with that one. I also had a Lynx RS, which is basically, and that was an '83, which was basically Mercury's version of the GT in '83. Mm-hmm. You had a 5-speed fuel injected. I just, again, sold that to another good friend of mine. Same place that the brown car came from.
Well, let's start with the L, actually. Let's talk a little bit about each one. How you came by it, what drew. I mean, this is in remarkable condition.
So the '83, again, it came from Jeremy. He had bought it off of, I believe, the original owner's son off of a small coast in Michigan, population of like 63 people, so it was a very small town. Mm-hmm. The car was only driven on the island, basically, when the people, were there. I guess it was kind of their vacation home, if you will.
So what kind of mileage has it got?
When I bought the car, it had just under 79,000. Right now, it's sitting at just about to roll.
That's
89,000.
4-speed manual?
4-speed. What's special about this one, there are several different 4-speeds that were available. In '83, another 4-speed was added just before they dropped them. I classify them by the color of the transmission tags, but this one is more of a wide ratio. more of like a highway transmission, has longer ratios.
Mhm.
First gear is really tall. You really have to slip the clutch taken off, but I can cruise 75, 80 with it comfortably, keep up with traffic.
So you don't need an overdrive.
Don't
then.
really need an overdrive. It also has what's called a fuel saver package, which, as far as I have been able to tell, it had a very small Venturi carburetor. I think it was 32 millimeter. Also, it had that wide ratio transmission, and it also had a shift light,
Okay.
which illuminated, when it wanted you to upshift, for best fuel economy, if you will. This one averages anywhere in the wintertime when I was driving it, I was getting around 32, 34.
Mm-hmm.
The best so far I've gotten was about 36, 38, depending on how I drive.
That's not bad for a 40-odd-year-old car. So we got a GL here, which is a slightly more updated spec, rather like the European L and GLs. And you obviously got extra chrome with this being a GL, and you got the bright wheel embellishers on this, and you got the bumper overriders on this GL as well. That's the immediate thing that sets it apart. So tell me how you came across this one, because the seats on this, of course, are got a bigger bolster to them, and you got headrests as well.
So this one has pretty much been untouched since we brought it home. Obviously, you can see it hasn't been cleaned up or anything yet. Mm-hmm. This is a early '81 production. It is an automatic. I bought it as a parts car in Missouri. It was sold to me as a parts car.
Digital clock.
Very cheap. I got it, like I said, as a parts car. It does need a cylinder head, which I've got for it. And this one will eventually be the new daily driver, rather than the brown one.
Right. This is a GL wagon, woody wagon. Americans love the wood on their wagons, and that extends even to a small wagon like this. I think it's fantastic. To quote a cliche, you can't beat a bit of wood in the morning. And just look at this. Even extends to the roof rack, which is phenomenal. And you've got more premium seats. You've got the center armrest there, look, and still no rev counter in this one. Automatic. This has even got an 8-track tape deck, and there's an 8-track tape there as well. But just look at this. When did you last see a red interior?
So this one actually premiered in a couple movies. First one was a couple years ago, was Archive 81 in Netflix. It was a background vehicle, didn't have a very good shot.
This very car.
And the most recent was with the new Tom Hanks movie, A Man Called Otto. It appeared in probably 4 or 5 pretty good shots in the movie as a background car. And again, it is this exact car. I had bought it from a gentleman who did nothing but movie cars that he would rent to, different filmmakers and whatnot. And I got in contact with him, and at first he was a little standoffish, if you will, kind of wondering how I found it, and knew he had it. But once I talked to him, he was a real nice gentleman, and we ended up working out a deal on it and brought it home.
This looks and sounds like brand new. It's quite incredible. This before the Escort GT was the SS. What, they made the SS 2 years?
No, not even a full year. The SS was, I believe, late '80. It was talked about, and then was released in early '81, I believe. It was only made, I think, for 6-7 months,
Good
8
Lord.
months maybe. We were doing some interior work.
They did a wagon SS too.
They did. They had a wagon SS. I was doing some interior work to the car last year. It just never got finished. I was just putting the correct era radio back in it. I'm doing some work with the trim and stuff. The interior shows its age, to say the least. In this one, the car is just over 100,000. I believe it's right around 108,000. I bought it with just under 100. But yeah, they made SSs. You could have got yellow, silver, red, white.
And this has the optional quarter lights,
vent windows in it, as well.
like the wagon does, which was unique to the American car. But it's a tremendous looking car. Looks amazing in yellow. Very rare back then for a car, especially of this ilk, to be in yellow. It became much more de rigueur in the 90s and 2000s. Now, since filming took place, Danny's actually sold many of these cars. He's actually trading up.
But he's still got this jet electric car. This is extremely rare, this car, chassis number 3, and he's since acquired another one. So we're going to go back out in the near future to meet Danny again and film those electric cars and take one out for a spin as well. I know that the wagon has gone, and I think that that GL has gone as well. This SS has definitely gone, this older one. It'd be interesting to see him again and see what he still has and what he's doing. But I'm really looking forward to seeing the electric car, very, very early electric car, and seeing what he's doing as far as Ford Escorts are concerned now. So there we have it. Just look at the interior of that. This is so 1980s. Anyway, that's it from me. I'm Darren, and this is Auto Atlantica.